Well, Zillow has once again revised their housing numbers for 2024 down. This is the second month in a row that they've revised their housing numbers. Yeah, so seems like a little bit of a moving target for Zillow and for their forecast for 2024. Let's bring up the headline from Fortune. Zillow revises its 2024 home price forecast downward for the second month in a row. Here's why. So when you scroll down the paragraph, you finally get the answer. Zillow economists have come to terms with the likelihood that a resilient labor market, so it's the labor market's fault, will mean a longer than expected period of elevated interest rates. We'll parse this out in a second. With firming of rates, the housing market has lost some steam, according to Zillow. Elevated mortgage rates are weighing on new listings, with rate-locked homeowners largely opting to hold a relatively low payment associated with their current home. So we've talked about that significantly, right? You know, why sell when you got to upgrade to a higher rate? We've already covered that a lot on this program. So one of the things that I think I have a problem with this particular statement is Zillow economists have come to the term the likelihood of the resilient labor market will mean a longer than expected period of elevated rates. Now, let's remember that the labor market might affect the rates that the Fed sets, but that the rates the Fed sets don't always correlate, as we covered last week, with the 30-year fixed mortgage. So theoretically, and this has definitely absolutely positively happened before, the Fed could cut their rate. The Federal Reserve could cut their rate, but mortgage rates might not come down. Those two things are not permanently linked. There's a significant, what's the opposite of correlation? Divorce between those two data points. So, I think the Fed funds rate is definitely connected to employment, but employment is not necessarily directly connected to mortgage rates. But I think the reason our rates are going up is not necessarily the Fed, because the Fed hasn't raised rates. You might just have noticed that the Fed hasn't raised rates for a little while, but mortgage rates still continue to go straight up. So these things are not directly connected. Lance Lambert has the numbers for us. By the way, Lance used to work. I don't know Lance Lambert, but he used to work at Fortune, and he just recently launched a new website, which I think we'll plug for him because I think it's pretty good. Last month, it was 4.9% for the 12-month outlook. Then before that, it was 6.5%. Now they have cut their outlook to 2.1% year over year. So this map also from Lance Lambert, which I'm going to keep up on the screen here. And I'm really interested in what you folks have to say about this. I'm going to turn my comment tab over here because I loved your comments that came in last week. That was pretty awesome. So please, love your comments. I'm going to ask you a question in a minute. On the left-hand side is the Zillow previous forecast for into July of 2024. Now, the blue indicates appreciation in price, and you can see there's quite a bit of blue across the country. The only parts of the country that have a teeny bit of touch of red, it looks like New Orleans, maybe a little bit of Louisiana. And then the new forecast is much whiter because it's neutral. And so we have a lot less blue, so a lot less appreciation. And there are now a number of dots that are red, a number of little red spots on the map, which is actually price deflation. So I'm really interested. I don't really even know where we have viewers across the country. I know we have some in Florida and it's certainly here in New England. But so I'm really interested in what you think is going to happen for price next year in your market. And, just throw in what market you're in. If you're in Atlanta or, Fort Lauderdale or, Boise or whatever it happens to be. Looking at these two maps, you definitely see some resilience on price, where price is still increasing, although at a lower pace, in Florida and also Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and parts of Tennessee. And I imagine that is a knock-on effect from the pandemic and also decades of people moving from the Rust Belt and the Northeast to warmer climes, right? And also friendlier tax situations that they have down in Florida and many of these other states here. Tennessee is also a no-income tax state. And I'm broadcasting to you from Massachusetts, which is also known as Taxachusetts and is becoming even more Taxachusetts than ever before. I mean, we haven't covered this on the show, but here in Massachusetts, they are now pushing for a local option transfer tax. So many of you might call it a deed tax or a recording fee. That's the fee that the seller pays to record the deed at the time of closing. That's a statewide or a county-wide thing. It's almost universal across the state. But now they're pushing, and given the political situation here in Massachusetts, it's only a matter of time, I think, before it becomes a local option to add a little extra onto that on a per town basis. So if you close it in, let's just say Plymouth, where I'm broadcasting to you from, if they adopt it in Plymouth, it might be more expensive to sell your home in Plymouth than it would be to sell it in the next town over. Local option. They did that for mails tax a little while ago. And so they're probably going to go that way with the deed transfer stamp or whatever the fee to sell your house, to record the piece of paper. And of course, that piece of paper, as you know, to record it is just, because data storage is pennies. The county collects thousands and thousands of dollars to record your deed, even though it's only cost the task of doing it is almost zero. It's a huge profit center for the state of Massachusetts, Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So here are your forecasts, and a little bit of price resiliency here in Massachusetts. Massachusetts went from all blue to almost all white. So Zillow is basically saying zero change, except for Cape Cod. It looks like Cape Cod held on. Cape Cod's a little bit of a different market than the Boston market for sure. Much older population there. Maine held on to its pricing a little bit. A lot of people, by the way, the number one destination for people moving out of Massachusetts is Portland, Maine. I know, who would think people want to move to someplace colder, but there you go. All right, we do have a comment here. The question is there still appreciation? Maybe throw this up on the screen here for you. Is there still appreciation? Well, there is still appreciation, depending upon where you are here in the country. As you can see on the map, and by the way, all credit to Lance Lambert for putting this map together at Resi Club. That's at Residential Club on Twitter. And, there's still some appreciation, especially in those states that I mentioned: Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and still over in Arizona and up to Idaho. But otherwise, the appreciation, more or less is at 0 or 1%, with a smattering of faltering markets, most notably in Louisiana, I think, and maybe up in Minneapolis. I think that might be a couple over in California. So it's neutral that way. Great question. This particular viewer is saying a 10 to 20% reduction is not in the cards. Not according to Zillow. Not according to Zillow. No, they're not saying that. I'm wondering I'm wondering if you could come back and just put what market you're thinking that might happen in. Are you saying that's a nationwide situation you're thinking about, 10 to 20% down nationwide? Or are you talking about specifically in your market? And of course, the real estate, there's going to be a lot of variation nationwide on prices, right? We have we're talking a national number of appreciation. But of course, everyone's market is different. As I just said, the Cape Cod market here is different than the downtown Boston market. And that's actually different. I live kind of halfway in between those two places in Plymouth. And I remember after the 2008 housing crisis, prices in Metro Boston, within what we call the 128 belt, but the immediate urban core in the cities and towns around it, those started to bounce back by 2010, 2011. Prices in that core went up they bounced back quickly. People wanted to be closer to the city back in 2011, 2012. My suburban price, I am outside of the urban core in Plymouth. I'm 50 miles from downtown Boston and my pricing didn't start to bounce back. I just looked up on the chart. I went to Zillow and looked at my home price. It jived with my recollection until the spring of 2018. And I do remember the spring of 2018 where houses, like all of a sudden houses started to bounce back because Plymouth has always been a trade-off of a lower price for a longer drive to Boston. So I'll be really interested if we do have a 10 to 20% dip, like you just mentioned. I'll be really interesting to see, because of the work from home factor, of whether or not which parts of the country bounce back quicker, right? That'll be really interesting to see. He says he's following up. I'm waiting and I'm on the fence to buy one more in the Orlando market. Okay. So you sound like you're a buyer of or investment property. And I'm guessing you're doing that to rent it out and or to Airbnb it. I was kind of curious. Are you looking for a long-term year-to-year rental, or are you Airbnb it? I'm just kind of curious. So thanks for that interaction. Really interesting to look at Zillow and how they've changed almost month to month. They were they were at 6.5, then they're 4.9. Now on a national basis, they're at 2.1. I mean, to go from 6.5 to 4.9, okay, I get that. That's a big reduction, but okay. And now they've gone from 4.9 to 2.1. They basically cut their prediction by more than half. So for national pricing, I do not recommend this, but if you go over to TikTok and you put in buying a house in 2023 or something like that, like housing affordability in 2023, you're going to see a lot of it. We're not going to play any of these. Don't worry about it. You're going to see a lot of people, especially younger people, complaining about how the American dream is now unattainable and that they have to rent. And this is really not good for society. It's much healthier for a functioning republic / democracy like we are, that you can feel that you can literally own part of America because you own some real estate. You're vested. When we have a lot of young people in their first-time home buyer situation, 25 to 32-ish, age, and they can't buy a house where they thought they could have bought a house, even a starter house. This is not a good situation for the country writ large, is it? No, it's not. So, a lot of these people, they might have to adjust their expectations to buy something smaller and in the current market. Or if this persists, it might be something where they start to move to other markets that they never considered before. I certainly think, to bring it back up, I certainly think when you look at this map, Idaho is one of those situations, isn't it? Idaho is one of those situations. A lot of people from California are moving there. But I think also a lot of people a lot of people are looking at Idaho and saying, well, it's really pretty. The climate's not that bad. And we can move here at an affordability that is a lot less than Los Angeles or San Francisco or even parts of Colorado. So Idaho is bouncing back. I do not understand why, or Idaho's shown a lot of price growth, I should say. I don't understand why Wyoming is not bounced back. Wyoming has been sticking at about 585,000 people, which is the lowest populated state in the whole country, for several years now. And yeah, I guess it's the winter. Last winter was brutal winter, but it's an absolutely beautiful place. If you've ever been there, I'm strongly recommending a visit to Wyoming. All right. over here on this article here, a big article this weekend, saving money to buy a house, your dollar goes half as far as it did at the end of 2020. New data shows, which is basically what I was telling you about when we talk about looking at TikTok. And what this NBC News article basically does is factor inflation also with rising interest rates. And I mean, that's overall, that's devastating, especially for young people who are not yet in a home. So that is tough. Saving money to buy a house, your dollar goes half as far as at the end of 2020. A tough market for home buyers keeps getting tougher as the combination of rising prices and climbing mortgage rates makes it even harder to afford a home. Add in inflation, because effectively your dollar is 83 cents versus what it was at the beginning of the pandemic. Brutal. Jack, what's going to happen with inflation? So that's a good question. Nobody knows, but thanks for tuning in today. We'll find out together, I guess. Once again, I think it's really important to note that the Fed does not set inflation. If the Fed woke up tomorrow and decided to cut rates, that does not mean inflation will go down. It does not mean mortgage rates will go down. Inflation right now is being driven not by the Fed, but by Congress. And here's a really interesting chart by E.J. Antoni, economist at Heritage. Worse yet, the pace of inflation remains about twice as high as before January 2021. There are no signs of slowing, with the Treasury borrowing $500 billion this month alone. So you see that green line where inflation was at pre-January 2021. In terms of that's consumer price index, moving up at a kind of a steady pace. And then as soon as we hit January of 2021, January 2021, you see the annualized rate at 8.5%. Complete coincidence, by the way, that kicked in January of 2021 when we changed presidential administrations. Complete coincidence. And then we kind of steadied off since June of last year at 3.4% annualized on a CPI. But given the fact that we have to borrow so much money and refinance so much money because the Fed didn't lock in at a low rate, like most mortgage holders were smart enough to lock in at a low rate. 95% of people have a fixed rate mortgage, and most of those are under 5%, but, or at least if you got it a couple of years ago, it was under 5%. But the Fed wasn't smart enough to do that. So here we are with our current mortgage rates, just under 8%. Now, remember, the Mortgage News Daily number assumes that you have very good credit. So if you're, kind of just have, I used to, when I rented apartments, I always said, pre-qualified people over the phone. I said, do you have credit? How's your credit? Is it good, better, or best? Because most people don't know, but they kind of know if it, the old Sears and Roebuck, remember the Sears and Roebuck good, better, and best product? So I used to ask them that if you have good, better, or best credit, and they would kind of have a hunch. And right now you're 7.97 with better credit. So if you only have good credit, you're paying well into the eights for a mortgage. And if you have bad credit, you're probably paying closer to 9, which is, just absolutely crazy. What are we at on the 10-year this morning? We are at 4.972. So that's actually slagged a little bit since I fired up the computer this morning. We were just shy of 5, and it just seems like just a matter of time before we go to 5. I don't think that will be that long. Economic news this week. Tomorrow, we have a very important Case-Shiller index coming out tomorrow. Now, I don't really think the Case-Shiller index is important in terms of your localized market. The Case-Shiller index is important relative to the thing that we started to talk about this morning, which is your national price forecast. because remember, the Case-Shiller only does the top 20 markets across the country, and it also is a lagging indicator. So it's not going to tell you what's going to happen right now. It's more like a big picture situation. I think we also have some other minor economic data tomorrow. Wednesday, new home sales. New home sales, very important. It'd be very interesting. GDP out on Thursday, as well as durable goods. But also on Thursday, pending home sales. And then Friday, we have PCE. Now, PCE doesn't get a lot of attention, but it's basically a measure of inflation with a lot more healthcare factored into it. It's kind of like PCI, or CPI, excuse me. It's kind of like CPI, but with a lot more healthcare in there. So that'll be Friday. It'll be very, very interesting. I know a lot of you want to talk about the whole National Association of Realtors court case thing, and let's just get into it briefly today. Today starts the week 2 of the trial, and again, I think this is becoming less and less important because of one thing, and that is they have already caved on the mandatory cooperation rule, and because, as we've covered at length on this channel, we find out that the mandatory cooperation rule doesn't really matter. It's a red herring. If you make it optional, it doesn't really change things in the marketplace. The only thing that would change things in the marketplace would be a complete ban. And we did cover last week the fact that New York Real Estate Board is now going to have sellers pay the buyer agent directly rather than flow it through the list agency. So week 2, I guess this is important, this court case now, because it might preserve NAR as an entity, as an organization, but not necessarily as for the commission side of things. I don't think it really matters. Real Estate News is out with an article saying that maybe they have the wrong plaintiffs because they should really be focusing on buyer plaintiffs, because buyers are the ones that are getting screwed, not sellers. That's an interesting legal argument. And they also make this point that maybe they didn't have enough cross-state situations in order to qualify for this particular type of narrow antitrust court case. So these are legal arguments about how the realtors might get off. But again, I think that's only relative to whether or not the realtors continue to exist as an organization. I think the more important thing that we have to keep an eye on is, when does the Department of Justice intervene in that case? And also, we covered Mr. DeWiggins from Next Home Realty last week. We pulled him up on the YouTubes, and we found out that he had dug up a executive order that Biden had signed in 2021 that would have authorized the FTC through their rulemaking authority to make changes about pricing without having a lawsuit. It would just be a rulemaking situation. So there'd be probably a comment period, but other than that, the FTC could do what they want. So I dug up, he quoted, and then I have since dug up this very exciting executive order from Joe Biden from the summer of 2021. And if you go down to Section 5 and then scroll down to Section H, here we are here. Here's the money quote. To address persistent and recurrent practices that inhibit competition, the chair of the FTC, at the chair's discretion, is also encouraged to consider working with the rest of the commission to exercise the FTC's statutory rulemaking authority as appropriate and consistent with applicable law in the following areas. And then you have to go down to item 6, untying or unfair tying practices or exclusionary practices in the brokerage or listing of real estate. So we've definitely seen situations where the Biden administration has made an executive order and they really haven't, how do I say this politely, haven't cared whether or not it was legal or not. Because when you file an executive order and you kind of know it's not legal, or you file a regulation and you know it's not legal, it still takes a significant time to overturn it through the court process. And this just makes, as I mentioned last week, this just makes way too much political sense to come out and say, hey, let's help people make homes more affordable. Affordability is a big problem. All you got to do is go on TikTok and find out how difficult it is to buy a home, right? TikTok is the truth. And all we're going to do is we're going to take away money from those greedy real estate agents and put it back in buyers' pockets. I mean, that's really, really super powerful if you're a politician in 2024, right? And some of you on the web or on the call or whatever this thing is, live stream thing, are like, oh, they can't do that. That's not to make sense. I'm from Massachusetts, right? And trust me, if they can come, I can totally see how they would pitch something like that. Because that's the type of thing we hear in Massachusetts on a wide variety of topics, like every day, right? We can basically they come out and say we can tax our way out of affordability. I mean, the concepts that come out of here are just wacky on so many different levels. Maybe some of you live in these parts of the country, and if you don't, then I envy you. But I can totally see the politics of that to be incredibly powerful for 2024, for next year, right? Now, they might wait until some of these court cases settle out. Maybe the court cases play out. But there was this argument that says, well, why don't they just wait till the court cases play out? And if the court cases take care of it, then the government doesn't have to do it. Let me tell you that once the government gives itself the authority to do something, it almost always exercises that authority. And if the government waits for the courts to settle these cases, then they miss the publicity opportunity of making the rule themselves. Why would they want to do that? So you got to start to think about how they think. Well, I think that's our update for today. By the way, I'm Jack from Jack Gately Real Estate here in Plymouth, and I'm no genius. You guys are the geniuses. I'm just some knucklehead that learned how to live stream on YouTube. But hey, sign up for my real estate school. Take my part-time real estate agent academy. Otherwise, we're going to see you tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. I've loved doing this live stream, and we're going to continue doing it. We'll see you tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Have a profitable day. Go make some money.